I think the best result is if you combine all those signals together. Um, like if you combine modalities, like if you have a signal on whether the face looks AI generated and a signal on whether the voice is AI generated, what we found is, you combine those things, you get a better result than either one independently. Um, and if you have a whole detection pipeline that takes into account, for example, the email address of the person you're on a Zoom call with, and combine that with these, I guess, more like, new technology features like the AI generated or not type stuff. Uh, all that stuff kind of ensembles together, and then you can get a more comprehensive picture. So the old stuff is useful, the new stuff is useful. If you combine them all together, that's, I think, um, how you can get the biggest, the best results, I suppose.
Lucas Hu, welcome to the Human Zero Day. Thank you so much for joining the speaker series. I really appreciate your time and the energy you're going to invest with me over this short conversation. So thank you very much.
Yeah, no, thank you, Michael.
So Lucas, you're obviously a technologist. You're in the cutting edge of machine learning and artificial intelligence. You're devoting so much of your time and energy today to the context of phishing, social engineering across what looks to be different modalities, which I think is one of the really interesting pillars of the evolution of social engineering and phishing as they now come out in all shapes and forms, from websites to videos to phone calls to emails and SMSs. The attack vectors seem to just be expanding across the channels, and they seem to be getting more and more sophisticated. And before we dive into that, please walk me through a little bit your own journey of how you got here. How do you end up choosing to devote your time and energy to this problem?
Yeah, so I originally came pretty much purely from like a AI ML background. So studied computer science and then electrical engineering at USC, and pretty much the whole time I was focused on AI ML, did some research related to that. And then I ended up interning at Palo Alto Networks. Not that I was into cybersecurity beforehand, but when I got there, I found out that I really liked it. Um, and it was interesting to see like not just, how AI ML could be used, but I thought the space itself was just so interesting. And especially the evolution of it, moving from like, low-level malware, and then gradually attacks have kind of moved up the chain to more like social engineering and actually attacking like people's psychology rather than how machines work. And I thought that was really interesting. Like, I really enjoy learning how the attackers try to frame things. So I decided to just stay in the field, and that's where I am now.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I often share with people, it's such an interesting evolution, looking from firewalls in '95 to malware, like with the semantics, and then eventually to cloud security, and then identity, and all of a sudden it's like we're going up and up all the way to the human
Right,
mind, and
right.
it's super fascinating. And tell me a little bit about your work with Duet. Because I have because I like I mentioned to you, I think it's such a cool endeavor that you've been a part of. Tell me a little bit about what that's about.
Yeah, this is something I helped start as a student when I was at USC with a few other of my friends there. We visited some refugee camps in Greece as a part of a class, and we saw that there was a lot of stuff that was being donated that wasn't really being used, and at the same time, the refugees weren't really getting the exact items they wanted. So my way of describing it is it's sort of like a way that refugees can directly request the things they need from stores in their community. And then you as a donor can browse those exact items and then pay for them online. So check it out. It's at giveduet.org, still active. But yeah, it was just a cool side project that we're still going on with.
Amazing. So let's dive into social engineering and phishing. You are living at the cutting edge of it. You're at the forefront. The scale at which you're operating, it looks like from a detection perspective, is quite amazing, and probably gives you a really good first-hand glance at what we're seeing in the world today. So, paint me a picture of what are the types of social engineering and phishing attacks that you're observing that are out there right now.
Yeah, there's a few different ways of thinking about it. I think one helpful one is on the one hand, you have like very mass non-targeted phishing campaigns. all the way to like very, very hyper targeted spear phishing attacks. I think that's probably the most helpful axis. So in terms of volume, in terms of like what we detect, obviously the mass stuff is just going to have higher detection volume, but that stuff usually tends to be easier to detect. And then, the further you move toward kind of the hyper targeted direction, the lower volume you're going to have because it just takes more effort to craft those attacks. But, obviously like higher percent of success, and it's more difficult to detect as well. So actually with deepfake stuff, we also see kind of both sides of the spectrum. We see, kind of mass deepfake scams that are just, populated
Elon
on
Musk
yeah,
investing in
yeah,
crypto.
like a YouTube advertisement or something like that. That's just a total scam. All the way to like, super targeted. Someone calls you on WhatsApp and is voice cloning your boss or something like that. So that is a thing as well.
And how new is this in terms of the development cycle of the sophistication and the modality of attacks? You've been at this for a few years. What's been your impression of, even if we just take the last year or two, what's changed over the last 12 to 24 months?
Yeah, I mean, obviously AI has blown up in the last 2 years or so, and deepfakes are obviously a big part of that. So I think the trends we're seeing with regards to that are much higher quality phishing emails that can be generated using LLMs. Um, that is something we see, although it's hard to determine exactly if something is AI generated or not. But I'm fairly certain that attackers are doing that. Um, and then, with regards to the social engineering side, being able to either clone someone's voice or potentially their face, although the face part is a little more difficult to do in real time, but the voice is more feasible. So those are kind of new types of attacks that we have to be wary of.
Yeah, I've seen that recent statistics from the Teammate investment group that have shown that credential phishing has been up about 1,200% over the last year, phishing emails about 1,000%, and the number of malicious emails on a daily basis now is north of 3 billion, where more than about half of them are LLM based, which I think is really, really interesting, considering that until, I guess, 4 years ago, the vast majority of them, maybe probably more than 90%, were really bad spelling with
Right,
some country from Africa needing some aid, right?
right. Yeah,
And
yeah.
so,
No, I mean it's so easy to just write a script that generates a million different phishing emails now.
so Lucas, as you think through from a technology perspective, as you think through this landscape and where we're at, because obviously we don't want to be in a world where we're just consumed by phishing and social engineering. What are you observing, and how are you framing your thinking around potential ways to start mitigating this threat?
Hmm. So I think with AI, it prevents, obviously the challenges are the scale of attacks and the variety of attacks that can be created, but it can also be very helpful on the defense side. So, a lot of our detection components now will use LLMs as, maybe not the core driver, but as a component in a part of a broader detection pipeline. So it's a very useful tool for the defense side as well. And in addition, it actually turns out that a lot of traditional defense techniques can even be applied to these new sorts of attacks as well. So with things like email, if you still see, a lot of suspicious emails coming from a small set of email addresses or, maybe a suspicious domain, those signals are still very useful. Like the fact that the email itself is AI generated doesn't mean that those signals are going to go away. Even same thing with like deepfakes, right? If someone is, logging into Zoom from a domain that does not match your company email, and is, for example, claiming to be like your boss or your executive or something like that, that signal is still very useful. So with the new generation of attacks, the traditional signals are still useful, even if, there's like a new layer on top of them.
And so it sounds like there's the traditional signal. You can look at the IP, the networking, the devices, and look at more traditional ideas of how you would think through and I guess an authenticated source or verified device. And then there's also the newer schools of thought looking at the pixels, looking at the audio signals.
Yeah.
Do you have a perception of how this space is forming in terms of feasibility for one or the other? Also looking a little bit ahead as to how fast these things are moving. What would be feasible from a technology perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think the best result is if you combine all those signals together. Um, like if you combine modalities, like if you have a signal on whether the face looks AI generated and a signal on whether the voice is AI generated, what we found is, you combine those things, you get a better result than either one independently. Um, and if you have a whole detection pipeline that takes into account, for example, the email address of the person you're on a Zoom call with, and combine that with these, I guess, more like, new technology features like the AI generated or not type stuff. Uh, all that stuff kind of ensembles together, and then you can get a more comprehensive picture. So the old stuff is useful, the new stuff is useful. If you combine them all together, that's, I think, how you can get the the best results, I suppose.
And I've been hearing a lot of CISOs and security professionals look at this space and are thinking to themselves, "Boy, how in the world, is the defense going to keep up with the attack?" I mean, it just feels like there's so much money and so much incentive for the modalities to become more sophisticated and for the attacks to become more fragmented, and so much fewer dollars being spent on defense.
Mm.
Then they're wondering whether to even look at detection as a feasible defensive mechanism over time. So what would you say to those CISOs yourself?
I mean, I think obviously the scale of attacks will increase and it has already been increasing, but that doesn't mean you just give up, right? I think if you take kind of like what we think as we call it like a Swiss cheese approach, where a new attack pops up and okay, we'll create like something that blocks maybe 90% of those attacks, but not all of them. But if you have a comprehensive enough defense architecture, defense strategy, eventually all these, layers of Swiss cheese are going to create, somewhat of a solid wall. So even though each layer itself might have some holes, and maybe some of these attacks are going to slip through some specific layer you have, if you kind of stack up a bunch of layers of defense, eventually it becomes really hard for an attack to slip through all of them. So, there's still hope, and nothing's going to be perfect, but it's still way better than just letting anything come into your network.
Absolutely, and I love the Swiss cheese analogy. So effectively, to picture it, you're saying let's take a slice of Swiss cheese that obviously has some holes, but if you create another layer of Swiss cheese which has a different
Yeah,
set of holes, then some of the solid layers will overlap some of the empty ones, and
yeah,
over time, if you build enough layers, then there will be very few holes that are perfectly aligned to let through. But
yeah,
that raises, I think, another question, which is, you know, these models aren't perfect also in terms of their false positive rate. And one of the concerns that I've been thinking about is, well, what happens if how do you manage the skepticism or the trust factor of these models, especially as many of them may be deep neural networks or black box models. How do you then mitigate your false positive rate so that you don't end up sort of catching everything as potentially suspicious, and then you're not catching other side of the coin?
yeah. I mean, that's very difficult, especially when it comes to like deep fake detection. I think that task, just as a pure machine learning, like is it AI generated or not task, is much more difficult than something like generic phishing web page detection. So, in terms of like the false positive to true positive trade-off, you're not going to get like as optimal a result as, some of the easier ML tasks out there. But it's still something, it's still a useful signal. And I think this is where it comes back to like combining a lot of signals together. Maybe if one model independently, you can't take its verdict at face value. But if you have other signals you can combine it with, and either ensemble them together or have like a cascading model type of approach, then you can really do better than, a single model alone. So yeah, that's one way of going about it. It's very tricky. Obviously, it's something we deal with a lot because, we process like a billion web pages per day. If we have a false positive rate of 1%, that's, like a million web pages that just got blocked. So yeah, it's tricky.
Yeah, I think it's kind of amazing to think of, when you say, yeah, 1% false positive, it doesn't sound like a lot
Right.
when you're actually looking at that scale, well, that's not feasible anymore.
Yeah.
And I'd love to get your perspective on, if we're looking at it from an enterprise perspective and a business perspective. I mean, so there's one thing to catch the mass social engineering attacks, and then there's the more targeted attacks,
Yeah.
which are really could, potentially take down an organization if they get through, if
Yep.
somebody gets access to a sensitive system or do one of those very large fraudulent transactions. How are you thinking through the evolution of this attack in the context of business operations? And we're doing everything digitally today, so what are we where are we heading into?
Yeah. So I'm not sure if the audience has heard of this like $25 million Zoom deepfake hack that happened, I think about a year ago at this point. Um, so we were thinking about this and like, even if someone was able to deepfake such and such person, the fact that they were still able to get that transaction to go through maybe implies that there weren't enough like safeguards, not even on the cybersecurity side, but just on on the operations side, right? Like you really need to make sure that, okay, like such and such person has to sign off on this, especially for a big transaction like that. So it's not just cybersecurity that's involved, right? Even like on the operations side, like let's make sure this is really a valid transaction that has to go through. I personally don't know what exactly that looks like, but I'm sure the business side people can figure that out a bit more. And then with regards to actually detecting these from the cybersecurity side, it's important to try to get visibility into all different parts of the attack chain if possible, right? So if the entry point is like an email saying, hey, this is your boss, can I set up a Zoom call or something like that? You want to make sure you get visibility into that. And then two, if they actually do have a Zoom meeting set up, you want to try to get visibility into that as well, right? Like what is the email address that's participating? Is it actually from your organization or not? Um, and potentially, if you can get access to like the transcript and things like that, even better, because then you can see, okay, is this person asking to send, a bank transfer? Because that's potentially pretty suspicious, um, right? And then you go further on, and then, okay, is this bank transaction actually legitimate or not? So the greater visibility you have into all different parts of the chain, the greater chances of you being able to catch that attack. And that kind of goes back to like the Swiss cheese analogy from earlier.
So it sounds like, well, we're starting from the root problem, which would be there are these distinct use cases where very critical events are about to transpire within the organization. You mentioned the $25 million heist, which by the way, I fully agree with you on that point. Probably should have been caught through procedures, but I think it shines light on this context of in if we're looking at it more holistically of how would we protect any financial transaction, given that, let's say, a big chunk of the phishing scams are on financial transactions,
Hmm.
probably having just a detection piece at the end point wouldn't suffice because of the Swiss cheese analogy. But if you were to have systems in place that would be able to consolidate multiple signals across the initial email conversation, maybe even the LinkedIn message that came through, and then going all the way to the payment or the transaction software, and
Right.
constantly validating, then that would hopefully you would catch at some point in the chain within that 6 or 7 step
Yeah.
process. You would catch, oh wait, there's actually something suspicious here. You should look right now into this and at least flag it so that a human moderator would look into it. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, 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 totally. Right. So either you can have all those steps running independently. Best case scenario, you figure out a way to combine all those signals together and then, analyze like the interaction and the chain from one step to another. But even if you just run a bunch of checks independently, that's still way better than just, having a single check.
Absolutely. Well, and it would make sense that if you had access to these checks independently, taking an ensemble approach would probably be the ideal next step.
Yeah.
Lucas, going, now that you've spent some time into this, what do you enjoy most about your work here?
It really keeps you on your toes. Like, right, 2 or 3 years ago, you could not have envisioned that like AI generated malware would actually become a real problem that we have to deal with and something we have to consider. Um, so yeah, I mean, it evolves super quickly. Like, I think when I first joined 4 or 5 years ago, I really couldn't have envisioned the projects that we're working on now, and especially the tool sets that are available to us now, right? That is constantly evolving as well. Like, um, all our teams are talking about how to use LLMs in different parts of our pipelines now, not just because it's like, a hyped up thing, but it is the projects we're working on now would not have been possible like 2 or 3 years ago. The types of detections we're doing, the types of like semantic analysis we're doing just would not have been possible 2, 3 years ago. And it's really cool because every new technology that comes out translates both to the attacker side and the defense side. So you're able to, see what attackers are doing and also use those to build up new defenses. So yeah, it's really exciting in that way.
Super interesting. Lucas, I really want to thank you for taking the time to join me. Really awesome conversation. Went by way too fast. Best of luck with continuing to detect what at this point is hundreds of thousands of many different types of social engineering and phishing attacks. So thank you and have an amazing rest of the day.
Thank you, Michael. That was a lot of fun.